talk a little bit about it, because Jeanette's taken you up the hill and you've talked about the archaeology, the history, the social history, the cultural history of gibbets. And I just want to add in a little bit of literary history, just a little bit, to contextualize what was going on. So when William Lowndes was gibbeted on the hill, and when the two men were gibbeted in Mickle Trafford, who are the second story in the book, thank you, it was the same time that Jane Austen was writing Pride and Prejudice. And I think this just shows us these two very different worlds that were happening in the same time, sometimes in the same space, you know, and I think it's always worth saying that, because you've got these sort of outrageous etiquette, genteel manners. If you use the wrong fork, you're ostracized for the next season of Jane Austen's world. And then you've got the decomposing corpses that you have to pass on the way to market on the other side. And Jane Austen herself always talks about this sort of etiquette being quite a facade, and what's underneath it, and the humanity underneath it. So this isn't a comment on her, but it is a little bit of a comment on the TV shows and the films that show Pride and Prejudice, where it's all taking turns around the drawing room. And yet, I did a thing. In Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth Bennet travels up from Hertfordshire to Derbyshire to Pemberley to Mr. Darcy's house. If Elizabeth Bennet, this doesn't bode well, does it? If Elizabeth Bennet had been a real person, there is a very real chance that on her way to Derbyshire, she would have passed the rotting, gibbeted bodies of Robert Leslie, Edward Drury, Moses Baker, John Knott, John Spencer, James Cook, Matthew Coughlin, Anthony Lingard, and John Gatwood. I didn't count how many of those bodies that she would have passed to get there. And just a little thing of John Gatwood is he didn't hang there for very long because his mum came and took him down. So that was just a thing I did to show you the two different worlds, really, that was going on. I thought that was quite interesting. And William Lowndes, the man who was hanged and gibbeted on Helsby Hill, he did actually occupy both of these at certain times in his life, and he was an astounding character. And if you have any questions, can you save them for the end, and we'll ask ChatGTP. So all of this information I got, if you go to Warrington Library, if anyone is interested, they have the original trial pamphlet from the time, and you can read it in its own words. I've quoted some of it when the words are really, really good. Right, and it's been a long time since I've read out my own work, so I apologise in advance. I think my eyesight's starting to go. Right, William Lowndes. The man who was gibbeted on Helsby Hill, if I may be so bold as to use gibbet as a verb, was called William Lewin. He was also called William Henry Clark, William Brown, William Hutchinson, William Maule, and William Hope. Not that he was born any of these, he was actually born William Lowndes. But for some, he was simply known as the postmaster. Not because he was brilliant at delivering mail, but because he was brilliant at robbing it. History is not totally clear how many times he robbed the post before the incident that saw him strung up on the hill, but I think if you've managed to accrue a nickname for it, then it's got to be quite a lot. The robbery we're focused on here was committed halfway between Chester and Frodsham. And the post boy, who was the victim of William Lewin, alias William Henry Clark, alias William Brown, alias William Hutchinson, alias William Maule, alias William Hope, but born William Lowndes, was called James Archer, and he only had one name. But what he had a lot of was previous form of getting robbed while on the job. So much so that there were whispers he'd been bribed several times into handing over letters containing cash and bills to highwaymen. And here I am, over 230 years later, stirring up the rumours again. The poor lad. But he was just a little bit dodgy. After getting robbed by William Lewin, alias William Henry Clark, alias William Brown, alias William Hutchinson, alias William Maule, alias William Hope, born William Lowndes, he was discharged from his position as a postboy, moved to a pub in Manchester, did bricklaying for 6 months, and then worked in the service of Dr. Catafelto, the notorious conjurer. For those of you who haven't heard of Dr. Catafelto, and let's face it, amongst us, who has, he was quite famous back in the late 1700s. He was a Prussian entertainer who purported to be such a brilliant scientist that he was second only to Sir Isaac Newton himself. He also reckoned he invented the hot air balloon 15 years before the Montgolfier brothers even dreamed of it. And my personal favourite, claimed his cat was evil. And I love cats, I really do, but they are all a bit evil. Dr. Catafelto, a man whose name had become synonymous with the word charlatan, had a show where he'd display images of microbes through a solar telescope, telling his audience they were flu germs. And what they actually were, I believe, were insects. And Catafelto was an outright con man. Although I do have to say that I liked his catchphrase, which was wonders, wonders, wonders. So the postboy James Archer may or may not have been guilty of taking the odd bribe from highway robbers, but his track record of being adjacent to nefariousness is just a little bit sus. Now, the particular robbery committed against James Archer that we're going to look at happened halfway between Chester and Frodsham on the 11th of March, 1788. However, it wasn't until August 1789 that they managed to arrest the highwaymen William Lewin, formerly known as William Henry Clark, William Brown, William Hutchinson, William Moore, William Hope, and William Lowndes, or as I shall now start calling him, Bill. That's over 2 years during which Bill ran free. And this is because our Bill lived his life like he was trying to sell a movie script to Hollywood. The absolute capers this man of many names got up to in those years was so wild that if that bloke from Peaky Blinders were to pay him in a TV miniseries, you'd all be thinking, this is a bit far-fetched. But it's going to be ridiculously true. He was a candle in the wind, our Bill, or at least one of those 60-second low-smoke cake sparklers you get in fancy restaurants when it's your birthday. And before I continue this account of the man with many names and the man of many crimes, I want you all to know one thing. He never killed anybody. He was a scoundrel, a risk taker, a criminal, and at times an out-and-out chav, but he wasn't a killer. Right, so Bill was born in Smallwood, Congleton in 1759. His dad was a weaver who made damn good money because he could afford to give his son a top-notch education. One which the documents of his trial would later describe as, and get this, an education somewhat superior to his situation in life. I disagree wholeheartedly with the entire concept of station, but there's a fair chance that it was because of this education that Bill got ideas well above his. And despite being brought up to inherit and continue his father's prosperous weaving business, Bill decided he wanted to teach dance and knock up a girl from the village instead. So he did. You'll find Bill always did exactly whatever he wanted. And in this incident, what he wanted to do was Betty Hayes. Later on, that changed to Eliza Smith, before he decided to abandon both of them and his daughter and his son, Bill. Then he left the bright lights of Alfreton, Derbyshire, where he met Amy Clark. And he married this Amy Clark, foraying into bigamy with all the confidence of a man firmly convinced that consequences were something that happened to other people. They had 2 daughters. She would be the last in the line of Bill's bigamy, but you're going to like Amy Clark because she was outrageous. Wait until the bit where she visits Bill in jail with 2 hacksaws strapped to her thighs under her skirts. I mean, she was wild. Now, in Warrington Library, for those of you interested, is a pamphlet from the trial, and it documents the robbery in great detail. It really started on Sunday the 9th of March when Bill offered the postboy, James Archer, a guinea to let him climb up onto the back of his horse and ride with him. When told no, Bill then went on to ask exactly what time and day the postboy would be returning on this route. James, taking this to be a red flag of immense proportions, claims he told him a fake date and time and sped on. Monday morning, as soon as James set off, before the sun had come up, he heard a familiar voice asking if he'd take a letter with him. Not stopping for a second, James turned and legged it, if you can leg it on a horse, back to the inn. That day, he waited until it was light out and rode alongside someone else in a horse and cart going his way. And then finally, Tuesday the 11th, James fell in step with a wagon driven by a carter called John Shaw. Bill, on foot, joined them near Stretton. This wagon must have been going slowly, and Bill must have known about some sort of shortcut through the fields, because what happened next is that Bill took off, saying he needed to go faster. Without Bill around, the postboy decided to part company with the carter and his wagon and sped up. And it was then, with conveniently no witnesses, that James claimed Bill leapt out brandishing, and it's not often you get to use a word like brandishing, a piece of rail with a nail through the end. According to James, and I must say in James's defense, his story doesn't change one bit, Bill grabbed his horse's bridle and shouted, "Damn your eyes, dismount!" Which is all rather exciting, isn't it? What's also interesting here is that James apparently handed him the bag of mail only for Bill to say quite assuredly, "Damn your eyes, that's not what I want." What he wanted was the other bag, the one with the money. How he knew about the money, I'll leave to you. But then Bill climbed up onto the horse and, unable to resist damning the postboy's eyes one last time, yelled back, "Damn your eyes, turn back." The postboy didn't turn back, although how he thought he'd have a chance of catching up to a horse on foot is anybody's guess. But then the wildest thing happened. It turns out that just up ahead was where the horse routinely stopped at a water trough during its standard post route. And because horses will always do what they want, no matter how much we think we're in control of them, it stopped, refused to go any further, and settled in for a long drink and a bit of a rest, with Bill still sitting on it, trying to make it go. By this point, the postboy catches up, and so does our witness, John Shaw, the carter on the wagon. And I have to say, would the scene have played out the same way had the carter not been around to see it? Maybe, maybe not. But what happened is, James raised the alarm, the carter gave chase, along with a weaver who showed up at the same time, and they got hold of the horse. And Bill escaped on foot with the post bag containing a stack of bills. They wouldn't catch him for another 2 and a bit years. Not because they didn't try, but because Bill was brilliant at this. By the 22nd of March, Bill was in Leeds buying cloth, cashing in a bill for £59, 5 shillings and 5 pence. On the 7th of May, Bill, who'd been living in Chesterton, ditched and ran. On the 22nd, his house was searched. They found the cloth, but no Bill. This is because Bill and Amy and one of their daughters, Polly, had scarpered to Ireland, where they became more elusive than a GP appointment in flu season. And then what happened? Well, an absolute string of postboy robberies, left, right, and centre, all through the northern counties. One particular robbery took place just up the road in Dunham on the Hill. Bill was becoming extremely rich. He was absolutely minted. We next find them lodging with a lady called Anne Crowe under the name of William Hutchinson. This was in Beaumaris. You know what? I was going to look before I read this, how to pronounce Beaumaris. Am I saying it correctly? Beaumaris. Thank you. There's many things I should have done before I came and stood before you. Right, where am I? By this time, there were posters calling for his capture, and a gentleman friend of Anne's suggested that the description on the poster sounded remarkably like Bill. That dark, rainy night when Bill came home, Anne confronted him. And I find it quite interesting that she didn't go to any authorities, she didn't sound any alarms, she just rather reasonably told him, and I'm quoting the original trial document here, she said she told him she had heard that he was the person that had robbed the post and that he must either clear himself or take his chance. Excuse me. She then let him get all his things together for a quarter of an hour before he left at about 10 o'clock into the driving rain. And I can't help but wonder at the lenience of her behaviour here, and perhaps Anne was a little bit a-cab before cops were even a thing. That night, the trial document states, money and persuasion in defiance of difficulty and danger procured him a passage over the river Menai to Carnarvon, which means he ran the 12 miles from Beaumaris to Menai, paid a bunch of boatmen an awful lot of money to row him down the strait, where he got rooms and board in Carnarvon. But what Bill didn't know was that he was followed. The race was on. As they entered into the house in Carnarvon through the door, Bill leapt out of the upstairs window with no time to put his shoes on and raced into the night. From here, he crossed Snowdonia, which we all need to start calling, and I need help with the pronunciation here, Airy. Who even remembers Uluru being called Ayers Rock anymore? So that night, Bill traversed what the trial document states as inaccessible mountains of that tremendous country, and he did it barefoot. Bill got away. Now, his wife, who I've not mentioned much yet, she calmly washes clothes and packs bags and plans to join him. She heads to Menai, where she pays boatmen to row her to Bangor in pursuit of her husband. An act of true love that was only marred by the fact that she paid the boatmen such an exorbitant fee that they bought a load of booze and got absolutely hammered and then drowned on the return journey. Every single one of them. From here, for the next 2 years, Bill robbed postboys galore. He snagged £541 and 8 shillings from a robbery between Penrith and Keswick alone. And I know it's not particularly academic to compare money then to money now, but £500 is worth roughly 98,000 quid today. And that's a 3-bed house in Bootle, right? He cashed that particular bill under the name of William Hope in Newcastle upon Tyne. He lived with his wife and kids in Northumberland in great comfort for a time before heading to London and cashing more bills, this time under his birth name of William Lowndes, before finally heading down to Exeter. And Exeter is where they catch him. On the 7th of August, 1789, he was apprehended by Mr. Sorrell, the keeper of Exeter Jail. It happens in the middle of a lavish dinner party Bill was holding for upwards of 20 men. Men who he tells to carry on eating without him because he won't be long. And you might be thinking, well, that's it now. Bill's caught, it'll be the gibbeting next, and that's the story done. But Bill isn't done. Bill really isn't done yet. The first thing that happens is that Mr. Sorrell takes Bill on tour to Oxford, Derby, and eventually Chester, where in each place, Bill is easily identified by everyone who's cashed in his bills. And it really ought to be mentioned here that Mr. Sorrell had the barefaced cheek to actually charge Bill for these travels and all the expenses accrued. Bit much, Mr. Sorrell. It's not like Bill killed anyone. And then the trial. In the County Palatine of Chester, it lasted from 11 a.m. and finished at 4 o'clock. Incidentally, the trial document says 11 o'clock in the forenoon. And I think I shall start calling it the forenoon from here on. Here he was pronounced guilty. Mainly because he was. And because you can't have people robbing the post, a message needed to be sent. Bill was sentenced to hang. He was locked up in Chester Castle, where the city's jail used to be, but he hadn't given up. Not yet. His wife, Amy, travelled up from Exeter, and this is the moment she straps 2 saws and a dozen files to her thighs and visits him in the jail. A little bit of bribery later, and Bill saws off his irons and those of 2 other inmates. Then they attempt to cut through the bars of their cell. Unfortunately for Bill, the bars are too thick, so another plan is devised. This time, Bill makes friends with a fellow felon called Charles Williamson. Charles was a debtor, and so under less scrutiny, and still working in order to pay off what he owed. Taking advantage of the low security around Charles, Bill talked him into smuggling clay into the prison. Bill's plan was to take an imprint of the prison key that the turnkey tended to rest on a stone unattended. The magic ingredient here, once again, was probably bribery. He was then to give the clay back to Charles, who had instructions to escape to Wolverhampton to a man who would make a key from the impression. Wolverhampton! It always amazes me the distances they covered back then. So Charles escaped, yay for Charles, but unfortunately he left his coat behind, and in the pocket of the coat, which was a rather fetching yellow jacket, was the clay mould. Well done, Charles. Plan 2. This time, Bill's wife, Amy, smuggled in a bottle of laudanum and more clay. Bill met another debtor, one whose head was a little more screwed on than Charles, who offered to pass the clay imprint to his sons to make a key in exchange for Bill paying off his debts. Because remember, Bill was rich. Then his gloriously intrepid wife brought in 2 parcels for Bill, which she alleged contained tea and sugar. They were, however, suspiciously heavy, and when the servant girl charged with delivering them to Bill's cell unwrapped them, they turned out to be a couple of loaded pistols. Thwarted again. When the day of the escape plan came, Bill sneaked 42 drops of laudanum into a turnkey called Thompson's Wine, who then dropped to the floor at 3 o'clock. Bill and his new felon mates threw off their irons and made a run for it, but in one last struggle, before the laudanum knocked him out completely, Thompson took the key and hurled it through the castle yard window. From here, Mrs. Thomas, the jailer's wife, not to be confused with Master Bun, the baker's son, shut the doors and sounded the alarm, and the escape failed again. With the sentence growing ever near, Bill cooked up one last plan. Or should I say plot? Gunpowder plot, to be specific. Procuring a pile of gunpowder, Bill decided to blow up the jail, bypassing the bars and the doors altogether, with the aim of simply stepping over the rubble of the exploded walls. And it might have worked, who knows? Alas, Bill didn't get to try it out, as his fellow inmates didn't take to the idea of blowing up the castle with them still in it, and they stopped the entire thing in its tracks. With so many escape attempts under his belt, the decision was made to rivet Bill's irons on, and Bill was finally done. 5 years of criminal escapades, and they ended here. He started to prepare himself for the hanging. He read Dr. Dodd's thoughts in prison, he prayed, he spent time with his wife, and he finally asked the question of what would happen to his body after the hanging. It was then, just days before they killed him, that he was told he would be gibbeted. In the words of the trial document, when told he was to be gibbeted, he seemed more effective than had ever been observed before. The last moments of William Lowndes didn't feel much like justice, even to the people at the time. It was documented that his final moments with his wife and brother were deeply moving for everyone present. Let's turn to the document again as Amy and his brother say goodbye. They all knelt down in the cart whilst he read Dr. Dodd's last prayer with the clergyman who officiated, and afterwards spent some time in private conversations and giving her a letter out of his pocket. After several struggles and many tears on his part, they finally separated. His brother continued with him some time longer and then left him. He asked then, and was granted, a tiny bit of autonomy over his death. They let him signal his readiness by dropping a handkerchief. And there he stood, the halter around his neck, saying a last prayer with great dignity, holding on to his last few seconds before letting go of the handkerchief and being dropped to his death. It does not mention that he was fitted in life with the gibbet irons, and this was generally the practice. So perhaps this means he was simply put into chains or put into a cage and then suspended on Helsby Hill. It was intended as a warning and a triumph of the law over criminality. The original document states, his body is hung in chains on the most elevated part of Helsby Tor, about 8 miles from Chester, from whence it may be conspicuously seen, and by means of glasses is visible to the whole county, most parts of Lancashire, Flintshire, Denbighshire, Shropshire, Derbyshire, etc., etc. But this isn't quite the end. The hill changed things a little, because there's something different about a gibbet on the hill. It's not a crossroads that can be hurried past. It's not a patch of wasteland you can shut your eyes and hold your breath and scurry away from. It's a hill. It's the hill. And everyone, every day, looks up. In 1791, in 2026, we look up every time. What the people of Helsby saw, what the law had done to William Lowndes, was so revulsive that they complained. They complained and caused a fuss, and a farmer even declared it was turning his cow's milk sour, and they got the gibbet taken down. They got Bill, a man who'd been so full of life, a man who had been loved deeply, taken down, which makes me rather proud of Helsby. So that was the story of William Lewin, alias William Henry Clark, alias William Brown, alias William Hutchinson, alias William Moore, alias William Hope, born William Lowndes. A man of many names, a man of many crimes, a man devoid of shame, but a man of the times. Upon the hill, a glimpse of hell, a glimpse of Bill, a warning still, a death knell for loving well and living well on borrowed dime and borrowed time, until a thrill, the lock cell, the bombshell, the hanky drop before he fell, the law's will, a bitter pill. His life was recorded, his crimes were distorted. He didn't kill, but the courts and the law did. Oh!